Frankie Goes to Europe. The appearance on Top of the Pops catapulted us up the chart. We leapt from 35 to 6. I reckon copies of the record were outselling hotcakes by 2 to 1. There was a midweek prediction that our next position would be 2 and we would be jostling for the top spot with Paul McCartney's Pipes of Peace. How cool would it be to knock a Beatle from number 1? To outsell a Beatle would be even weirder. The record is getting really good airplay on Radio 1, and then daytime DJ Mike Reid put the brakes on. I've never heard the recording of what he's supposed to have said, so I don't know what is the truth and what is embellishment, but I remember being in the ZTT offices when the news broke. It was banned. We were now officially branded as the rebels we'd always wanted to be. Someone at the BBC said the record would no longer be played. Is that a ban? We're delighted and not really prepared for the shitstorm that was about to come our way. I guess this is a good point to discuss the effect of the ban and put a few myths to bed. The record didn't get to number 1 because it was banned. As Rafa Benitez would say, fact. I think Relax was a more commercial hit than Two Tribes, and I think if people would have heard it at number 1 for a few weeks, then I think it would have outsold its follow-up. The band cost us sales rather than gave us more. In the coming year, Relax would stay in the top 100, and I think if all those sales during that year would have been throughout January, February and March, then I think that Relax would have been at the top for months. The only disappointing thing about the ban was the wording of it. I'd love to have been accused of outraging public decency or something similar rather than just have the single withdrawn from the playlist. On the 22nd of January, Macca got the Ook and we were number 1. Bye bye Beatle. Did that mean we were now bigger than Jesus? It didn't, but it felt like it. Cue red top outrage and outlandish headlines about the outrageous homosexual band from Liverpool whose smutty lyrics were not deemed suitable for the nation's youth. I remember my mum asking me if I was gay because a friend had read it in The Sun that all of the members of the band were gay. Ask my girlfriend if I'm gay, Mum. To have it suggested that I was didn't worry me at all. I was completely aware of my own sexuality and everyone who knew me was aware of it too. I couldn't give a fuck what anyone else thought or wrote as long as it wasn't slanderous, and I thought as long as they were writing about us, even if it is bullshit, they were not writing about Macca or someone else. We would be top dogs for 5 weeks, and during that time we would fend off some serious opposition. Whilst we were enjoying our second week at the top, Queen's Radio Gaga would crash in at number 4. It was a great tune and had a very expensive video to go with it that looked amazing too. It wasn't enough, and we managed to stall Freddie and the Boys at number 2, just as we'd stalled Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Wanna Have Fun the week before. We heard a tale that Freddie had flounced into EMI one day demanding to know why his record hadn't toppled the upstarts from Merseyside. A little-known German girl called Nena would eventually depose us with 99 Red Balloons, and now we were looking to her country to see how our record was doing there. Relax drifted down the UK chart rather than plummeted, and it would hang around in the lower reaches of the chart until Two Tribes came out. 7 different mixes of Relax were released on vinyl plus a cassette single. I didn't really like the 16-minute sex mix, as it didn't really feature the song in its single format, but I loved the US mix, which was a bit more conventional, and we'd adapt parts of that to our live version later. Were all these mixes ripping off the fans? Well, you could say that, but nobody was holding a gun to anyone's head at the Woolworths record counter. I guess there were a small amount of collectors and fans that were ravenous for any new version, and maybe they would have felt exploited if they'd bought something that they didn't really like. Were all the mixes good? To be truthful, I couldn't tell you which was which apart from the 2 12-inches I've just mentioned. I still get asked to this day what my favourite mixes are, and I'm truthful and have to say, I haven't got a bloody clue. The fans always know more than the band. I think it was during the early flush of success that we parted company with Bob Johnson. Holly says in his book that it was because he felt that Bob was spending too much time with Aztec Camera and had to let him go. First I've heard. I recall Bob telling me that he was letting us go because Jill Sinclair would not speak to him. She wouldn't return his calls and saw him as an obstruction in her and ZTT taking complete control of the band. He believed that such a relationship would be detrimental to the band's progress. The idea that Holly would make that decision on his own is ridiculous, but I guess it makes him look like the big boss man making all the right moves. We were gutted that Bob had been squeezed out of the frame. I remember years later he would invite us to a party at his flat, and Mark Ped and I sorted out a nice present for him. We organised a platinum disc for Relax with his name on it and presented it to him upon our arrival. He was well chuffed and had the same look on his face that I'd seen that night listening to the mix in the back of his Jag. He said something like, "Thank you boys, it's all I've ever wanted," and we were delighted to give it to him. Within days of Bob's departure, we'd heard that Holly was taking meetings with people like Simon Napier Bell, who had even called ZTT at one point and told him that he was now acting for the band. We were in a potentially dodgy place with nobody to fight our corner, and Holly was doing lunch with a bunch of dickheads we didn't know or want to know either. Bob was not the only one to move out of a job. Mark and I were still at the Corpy. We were in the charts in about 6 countries in Europe, and it looked like Relax was going strong and looked on course to repeat its British success, and I was still an apprentice. Mark had served his time and was out of his apprenticeship and was a qualified carpenter, so he jacked his job, but I was still an apprentice because electricians did an extra year than the chippies. I didn't want to throw 3 years' work down the pan even if I was a pop star. I asked for leave of absence and it was given. They said I could take a year out, and if it all went pear-shaped, then I could come back and finish my apprenticeship and qualify. I left the Corpy and became a full-time musician and would claim my £30 a week. This made reading stuff in the papers about us being millionaires very hard to swallow. I read a quote from Bros singer Matt Goss some years later that rang a few bells when he said something along the lines of, "There's only one thing worse than being skint, and that's being famous and skint." I remember being in Liverpool city centre at this time, and I was meeting Mark and Ped in one of our regular haunts, the Cunarder by St John's Precinct. I was there first and went up to the bar and met a couple of guys I knew from my time working in St George's Hall. As I was at the bar, I asked them if they wanted a beer. A year ago I'd have done exactly the same thing and they would have accepted a drink, but a year on their response was different. "You're alright lads, we don't want your money," was the snide reply. I was stunned and a little angry as well. "You don't want me money? You're on more money than me, you pair of planks." I let it slide because they weren't close mates and I couldn't be arsed getting into it with them. I realised very early on that fame might not change me very much, but it would change people's attitude to me. Ireland had released the record via their partners throughout Europe, and Frankie mania was spreading to the continent. You can't be in 50 places at once, but your video can, and due to the risky element of the first video, it was deemed we needed something more commercial to get on the TV, so we filmed another one. We went down to the Stiff Records building in Bayham Street in Camden and shot the laser beam version of Relax. It was done very quickly and very cheaply in a dark garage with a laser machine and minimum fuss, but it was very TV friendly compared to the first one and could be played in the other European territories where Frankie were taken off. This is a period where things will get a little blurry. We were in the eye of the hurricane and the early months of 1984 were chaotic to say the least, and it seemed we were driving to Heathrow every other day to fly somewhere in mainland Europe. It was frantic, but I do have some experiences in the memory bank from those initial TV shows. Our first foreign escapade was to fly to Bremen in Germany to appear on Musikladen, which was their equivalent to Top of the Pops. We weren't the only band on the plane. The Stranglers were flying out to do the same show, and they'd be staying in the same hotel as us. Mark is very excited. "Do you think Jean-Jacques will let on to us? Should I go and speak to him? I've got to speak to him, haven't I? Do you reckon he know who we are?" We land in Bremen and drive to the very flash park hotel in idyllic grounds that are covered in snow. We check in, then head to the huge lobby before leaving for the studio. The Stranglers are waiting in the lobby too, and as Mark walks past the table where they're sat, he gives a brief nod and a glance to Mr. Burnell. Blanked. Totally and utterly blanked. He comes over to the table where Ped and I are. "I can't believe it. I can't fucking believe it, man. I let on to me hero and he fucking blanked me. I've just been blanked by me fucking hero. I'm gutted." I was gutted for him, and myself, because I love the Stranglers too, and we would have loved the opportunity for a few green room beers and a chat with JJ and Hugh when we got to the show. Fuck them, they look like a miserable shower anyway, and there'd be someone better to hang out with when we got to the studio. Kirsty MacColl was on the same show, and she'd invited Lemmy to join her and stand behind her playing guitar while she performed The Guy Works Down the Chip Shop Swears He's Elvis. I was in awe. I'd seen Motorhead a couple of years back on their Overkill tour, and both Ped and I were big fans. This first meeting with Lemmy would spark a relationship that would last throughout Frankie's career. The people at Music Laden had seen our appearance on the Tube and decided that no Frankie TV performance could be complete without a half-naked woman walking around the stage. Cue the blonde in stockings and suzzies. Holly interacts with her during the song, and as it reaches its climax, Lemmy comes into shot, duck walking across the stage like Chuck Berry, and joins me at the side for a bit of twin guitar posturing before creeping off the stage with his arm around the blonde. After the show, we're all taken to a bar and the three lads are hanging out with Lemmy and having a beer with him. We really felt like rock stars now. I was introduced to Beck's beer for the first time. It was brewed in Bremen, and my relationship with it would last 5 times longer than the one with Lemmy. We all drank too many bottles of Beck's and watched the Rocksteady crew busting a few moves on the small dance floor of the club. They were over from the States for the same show and were promoting their first release. One of them, a guy called Crazy Legs, told us that he'd doubled for Jennifer Beal in Flashdance and did all the breakdancing scenes. The magic of Hollywood is revealed. On the 23rd of February, Relax reached the top of the German charts and stayed there for 6 weeks. During the promotion for Relax, we'd visited France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, Italy and Spain, and on all these journeys we were joined by a man from Island Records to act as a liaison with the people at the various labels across Europe and make sure we were checked in okay and woken up the next day and make sure we got home. Martin Satterthwaite would be named the International Meal Stealer because of his fondness for a slap-up nosh at the record company's expense. Within minutes of landing anywhere, he'd be on to Carlos or Michelle or Catherine, whoever, about hot dinners for the lads. When we first met him, we thought he was a total square, but over the coming months we really grew to like him, and he would often end up on the beer with us, and he was a very funny bloke when he was 1 over the 8. We were always more interested in cold beers than hot dinners, but I have to admit that being taken to top-notch restaurants and staying in 5-star hotels was very cool. The people entertaining us would ask us what we'd like to eat and we'd say, steak and chips. I have to admit the closest I had been to what I thought was exotic food was bachelor's savoury rice or a tin of beef Roma. The Europeans were always very hospitable and treated us very well despite sometimes being on the end of our misbehaviour and wind-ups. The average day abroad would go like this. Drive to Heathrow at the crack of dawn to meet the meal stealer. Board plane. Sleep. Check in at Flash Hotel. Interviews with Presser Hotel. Drive to TV studio. Maybe more interviews and a couple of photo shoots. Rehearse the show. Record the show. Dinner. Back to hotel. We rarely had a chance to go clubbing or drinking late, as by that time of the day the record company rep would have had enough of our company and we wouldn't know where to go in a strange town, and we didn't have a shilling to spend anyway. We had to find our own amusement back at the hotel. I guess this would be a good point to stop referring to Mark Ped and I as Mark Ped and I and start referring to us as the lads. We spent most of our time together and shared the same experiences, and it'll save me 2 words every time I have to mention something that we did. Everyone okay with that? Good. Holly would sometimes go off to a club with Paul, or on his own, and the lads would hang at the hotel bar, mainly because we could put any beers we bought on the room. We'd try and stay out of trouble. When the bar closed, we'd head upstairs and see who had the best view of the street. Why would we want a view of the street at 2 a.m? Because we wanted to throw snowball-sized clumps of wet bog rolls at the cars or pedestrians below. This practice of throwing googies began during these early foreign jaunts and would continue throughout Frankie's travels all over the world. Don't ask me why they were called googies, because I don't know. They just were. If we were lucky enough to have a room overlooking the street, we were delighted. All of these hotels had rolling shutters over the windows, so one person would be ready to pull the shutter down, another would be ready to pull the window shut, and the third would be in the firing position. In the spirit of fair play, the roles were changed every shot. Fire, slam, drop. We had it drilled military style. Cars would be the usual target. The sound of a googie hitting the car roof from 2 or 3 floors up was pretty loud at 2 a.m, and it must have scared the shit out the driver. From 5 floors or more, it probably left a dent. The next bit will feature a few examples of what happens when bored, half-pissed teenagers are left to their own devices in foreign countries. Hitting a moving car was feasible, but it became more difficult the higher up you got. The higher up you were meant that you were less easily spotted by anyone who wants to get out and have a look at what had just hit the car, so we could get a glimpse of our victim and check out the reaction before dropping the shutter. I remember staying in a hotel in Madrid, maybe the Ritz, and having a view over the street, 5 floors up, by an intersection with traffic lights. Oh, thank you, Lord. Car stops at the lights, fire, sitting ducks. As it was Spain, there were lots of cars that had the sunroof open. Even better. Here you go, Fernando. 2 kilos of wet bog roll exploding all over the gear stick of your BMW. This would go on until all the bog roll from all of our rooms had been launched out the window. We'd then move on to other stuff that we could find to throw. As these were posh hotels, there was sometimes a bowl of fruit in the room. Launch the fruits. I remember knocking a guy over from 4 floors up with a peach in Barcelona. Luckily, it hit the wall before it ricocheted and hit his nut, as it might have put him in hospital. I remember one hotel having a small bowl of hard-boiled eggs. Who stays at a 5-star hotel and suddenly has the urge for a hard-boiled egg? Not any of us. That's why they got launched out the window after the bog roll and fruit had ran out. I recall a visit to Amsterdam where we were only 2 floors up and emptied a carrier bag full of cold water on a passing cyclist. He didn't even flinch. He just kept on pedalling. Maybe he'd just come out the Bulldog Cafe and was too high to notice. Okay. We liked going to Paris because there was a shop around the corner from the Warwick Hotel in Rue de Berry that sold fireworks all year round. Bonus. We'd stock up on loads of little rockets and take them back to the hotel. We'd mount them on the radiator by the window at 45 degrees and fire them across the nearby Champs-Élysées. The room would stink from the rocket emissions, and luckily there were no smoke alarms, or this would have stopped the fun very early. The same shop sold silly string, and we'd always stock up on that too. This would come in handy when driving through hectic Parisian traffic. We'd usually be in some large car or van, and we'd pull up alongside drivers and give them a little squirt. Most of them took it in the good humour it was meant, but one time we got a bit more than we bargained for. We're on our way to a photo session and had the silly string at the ready. We were in the van and the only window we could fire out was situated just behind the driver's head. As we're crawling round the L'Arc de Triomphe, we give the guy next to us a little blast and he grabs something from under his dashboard and gives us a little blast back. He had mace, not silly string. Unfortunately, the elderly driver of our van got most of it right in the face, but the little blast that escaped him wiped out the whole bus. I guess this was a little bit of that direct action the French are noted for. We arrived for the shoot with red eyes and tears streaming down our face. We thought it was quite funny and probably a bit of karma for all the innocent bystanders that had been googied over the years and been denied any chance for retribution, but we felt sorry for the driver who'd taken the brunt of the hit. Sometimes unnecessary risks were taken to play a prank on someone, and I remember on that first visit to Germany where the evening turned a bit Bear Grylls when we retired to bed after the bar had shut. Holly had gone out to a club and the lads were bored. Mark was in the room next door to Holly and there was a narrow ledge about 8 inches wide running along the outside of the building below the window. We look out Mark's window and notice Holly's left his window open, so we decide to raid his room. We're on the first floor and there's a chance that someone would be injured if there were a fall, but Mark fancies it and climbs out. It's only a couple of feet away and once in Holly's room he could exit through the door. He steps out onto the ledge and makes his way to the window and climbs in. He disappears and comes back seconds later telling us the door's locked and can't be opened from the inside. Ped and I tell him to get the mattress off the bed and pass it out the window to us. He goes in and the next thing we see is Holly's mattress being edged awkwardly out of the window, bedding and all. We manage to pass it along the ledge and get it through the window. Mark wants to get more furniture and fancies taking the whole bed apart, but moving the mattress was hard enough, and we didn't want to risk dropping anything or anyone out of the window. Mark returns back along the ledge like James Bond and returns to safety. We drag the mattress down the hotel corridor and hide it under the stairs. Unfortunately, we're not awake when Holly gets back, so we don't hear the reaction, but he was not best pleased that someone had been in his room. The fingers pointed at us, but the locked door eliminated us from further inquiries. With the wonders of modern technology, you can look at the Park Hotel Bremen on Google Earth and see how this prank was achieved should you care to look. Europe loved Frankie and everything in the garden was rosy, But we had two worries looming on the horizon back home. We didn't have a manager, and we didn't have a follow-up single.